quick editor's note here. What you're about to see is a two-part series on the Jacksonville Jaguars. I meant it to be a one-part series, just one episode. Ended up being a 45-minute recording, and thus my audio recording was too big of a file to transfer onto my editing software. So thus, you're stuck with some crappier audio that came from my phone. Nonetheless, I decided to split this into two episodes, so you'll first hear the overall breakdown of the Jaguars' last season, their offense, that's the first episode, and then the second episode will be their defense. So thank you so much for watching, and without further ado, here we go. Hello everyone and welcome to Buffalo Live, your one-stop shop for live professional play-by-play reaction to every Buffalo Bills game this coming 2024 season, as well as breakdowns for each individual opponent. So excited to have you joining us today as we take a look at this Jacksonville Jaguars team. We are continuing our series in deep dives on each of the 14 teams the Bills play this coming fall. We've already looked at the Kansas City Chiefs. We've already looked at the Baltimore Ravens, the Detroit Lions. Now we're starting the AFC South series. And so to do that, we'll start with the Jaguars, and then we'll go to the Titans, followed by Houston and Indianapolis. After we're done with the AFC South, we'll look at the NFC West and then conclude with the AFC East. And that should take us right into the NFL season. Believe it or not, we've got about 9 weeks before the season begins, so really not that much time left when you think about it. And I was thinking earlier this week how it kind of feels like we are in the dead peak of off-season. I could be wrong. I'm curious what you guys think, but that's how I have felt lately, and just really excited to have football season back upon us. And so without further ado, let's get into these Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's talk about last year. Last year, the Jags finished with a win-loss record of 9-8. They started out 8-3, beat teams like the Bills, like Pittsburgh, split with Houston Texans. So those are 3 playoff teams for you. And at that point in the season, they had a 98% chance to make the postseason. And then they finished 1-5. Wow, the lone win against the Carolina Panthers. They struggled heavily with turnovers, especially in the red zone. Their red zone percentage on offense was pretty bad. And then they end up finishing second in the AFC South. They had the same record as the Colts, but had one more divisional win than the Colts did. So they won that tiebreaker there. But nevertheless, they did not make the playoffs. Sean McDermott as a head coach, 1-3 against the Jaguars, including that 2017 playoff loss in the wild card. So Sean McDermott has struggled with these Jaguars. Last matchup, you remember it well. It was a 25-20 loss in London. The Bills entered with a 3-game win streak and ran for just 29 yards. James Cook had a career low -4 yards on 5 carries and a average rushing yards per carry of -0.8. Yikes. The Bills were 5-12 on third down. That's just 41%. They accrued 11 penalties, and cornerback Kaiir Elam infamously had a pretty tough game. He had a good first 2 initial drives, and then he was misaligned on a 2-point conversion that cost the Bills 2 points. And then he got picked on and beat by Calvin Ridley in, I want to say, 4 or 5 crucial third downs before he was subbed out for cornerback Jamarcus Engram in the fourth quarter. And then the first quarter injuries, you remember them well, between Matt Milano and Daquan Jones. That severely hurt us. But looking at the Jaguars side of the game, the Jaguars ran for 196 yards. So while James Cook had a pretty awful day for his career, Travis Etienne Jr., 136 yards. That was a season high for him and the second best he's had in his career. 2 touchdowns. The Jags had 17 more minutes of possession on offense than the Bills did. They were 10 for 18 on third down. That's a percentage of 56. while their season average was 38%. So the Bills unable to stop the Jags on third down in this game. On this channel, I've made a lot about that game's circumstances, how it was in London, but I want to set the record straight about whether it was a home or away game. I mean, obviously, according to the schedule, it was a home game technically for the Bills. But one thing that I had forgotten about was Bills Mafia really showed out in that game. Head coach Doug Pederson said after the game that it felt like a road game for them. Jacksonville had to go to a silent snap count. So as much as I've complained about the traveling situation and how advantageous that was for the Jags, it was still a practical home game for the Bills, and the Bills could not capitalize. But as you know, the team just looked tired, and the Bills arrived Friday morning for that Sunday afternoon game. Jacksonville had been there for 2 weeks. And I'm curious how many hours the Bills devoted to sightseeing. Now, I'm not here saying that these players, who take a trip to London shouldn't be able to go, look around London during this business trip, because I believe that that's definitely a good thing for morale. You don't want to take a team to London and not let them go explore for a few hours. I think that would kill morale and the culture. But my question for the Bills is, why would you not want to leave as soon as possible? And I really thought about that, and the only answers I could come away with were, they're not sleeping on their own mattress, and they're away from their families, unless their families travel with them. But why are we not traveling like Monday, the day after the Bills played their game on Sunday, to acclimate to the time zone as quickly as possible? I realize that London is just 6 time zones away, whereas it might be even 5, whereas the West Coast is just 4, so it's not that big of a difference. But I don't know. I still think, why are we not in the space of get there as soon as possible, acclimate as soon as possible, and instead of showing up, less than 48 hours before game time? It was really debated about during the week of the game, and now it just seems like, well, that seems like such a simple solution. Just leave earlier. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. But let's get into this Jaguars offense, and we're going to be talking about how they did last year and how things are changing this coming season. So last year, they had a total yardage average per game of 339 yards, and that was good for 13th. So you're talking about a slightly above average offense across the NFL. Trevor Lawrence, with this passing operation, ranked 10th in average yards per game. There was one game where C.J. Beathard came in, but otherwise it was entirely Lawrence with 251 yards per game. Average rushing yards per game, not great. 96.8 yards per game. That was good for 24th, so bottom third of the league. And then average points per game, 22.2, which was 14th. So on average, just a little bit above 3 touchdowns. Giveaways. 30 giveaways from this offense was 5th most in the NFL, and you really saw it in the red zone. The Jaguars really struggled, and Trevor Lawrence struggled with throwing interceptions in the red zone. But let's talk about Trevor Lawrence. Such a controversial figure across the league in terms of, is this guy great? Is he good? Is he average? Is he elite? Is he bad? You could make the case for any of those, and I'm going to get on my analysis here shortly, but Lawrence threw for 4,016 yards, so he eclipsed that 4,000-yard mark, which is very impressive. That was 10th most in the NFL last year. A completion percentage of 65.6. That was good for 14th among qualifying quarterbacks. 21 passing touchdowns. That was 15th in the league. And as far as his accuracy goes, these numbers are according to Pro Football Reference. He had the most bad throws in the NFL. 104 bad throws. The bad throw percentage was 4th worst in the NFL. 18.8% of his throws were deemed bad, according to Pro Football Reference. If you want more information on that metric, you'd have to talk to Pro Football Reference, because I don't know how it's constructed there. But I would tell Jags fans, if you're watching this, don't panic, because guys like Matthew Stafford and C.J. Stroud are up there with those, scarier percentages. It's natural for a quarterback who plays a lot of football to have bad throws from time to time. So his on-target percentage, that said, was 74.3%, which was 10th worst. So, not the accuracy numbers you'd like to see for Lawrence, but definitely I wouldn't ring any alarm bells just yet. This past offseason, he signed a 5-year, $275 million contract. This was big money. $200 million guaranteed if that contract is completed. I know that's kind of an oxymoron, but if the contract is completed, minus all the incentives, Lawrence will be guaranteed $200 million. That's fourth most in the NFL. He was guaranteed at signing $142 million, which was third most in the NFL. And his average annual value, $55 million. That's tied for number one in the NFL. So Lawrence didn't quite reset the market for quarterbacks with this contract, but he did match it with Joe Burrow in terms of that average annual value of $55 million. So my analysis of Lawrence, I haven't watched every game that he's played, but he is a quarterback that I'm not really scared of. He makes plays every now and then from time to time. He did certainly with the Bills in London. I think he's a great prototype of a quarterback. Certainly coming out of Clemson, that was pretty consensus among analysts. I like how he moves in the pocket. He's quick. He's quick with the ball out of his hands. He scrambles well. He's quick on play action. He's not afraid to step into contact when he makes a throw. His average time to throw last year was 2.51 seconds, which was the third quickest. You had guys like Tua up there. I think Tua was number one in terms of the shortest time to throw. And that's not necessarily like an indictment on your offensive line. I really think that's how the Jags conducted their offense last year. It was very shallow schemes, and I think that's part of the reason why they made the changes in their wide receiver core. We'll talk about that later. But again, back to Lawrence. In terms of where this guy is, as his ceiling of success, I think he's better than Andy Dalton in his prime. And I can hear you on the other side of the screen saying, what, are you kidding me? Andy Dalton in his prime? Well, Andy Dalton in his prime was pretty freaking good. Okay, he led that Bengals team to a couple playoff appearances, if I'm not mistaken, like a lot of winning seasons, and was a great quarterback for them. I think maybe a better example, better comparison might be Carson Palmer. You're not talking about an elite guy, but you're talking about a steadfast player to lead your team. I just personally don't think that he's on that level of the Allens, the Mahomeses, the Burrows. Maybe he's in that same tier in terms of production as a Tua. And, those guys do very different things. I think Tua definitely is kind of a scheme fit just like Brock Purdy is, but I don't know. I just don't see Tua or Lawrence ever really getting into that next tier of elite guys, because I just haven't seen him take over the game, like completely be a truck for his team, as Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks like to talk about, right? Trucks versus trailers. Which one is your quarterback? I think Lawrence is kind of stuck in the middle, not really being a truck, not really being a trailer. So, but I think Carson Palmer is a generous comparison for Trevor Lawrence. So, and I think it's okay not to have a really hot take. I don't think anything what I'm saying is a hot take, but maybe I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments. Has he hit his ceiling? I don't think he has hit his ceiling, but I don't think he's pushing it too far further up. That's my general analysis of Trevor Lawrence. So let me know what you think about that in the comments. Now let's get into this wide receiver room. Start off with a couple statistics here. The average yards after catch. These are notable statistics to me. 4.7, that was the sixth worst in the NFL, and I'm not sure it will get any better considering who they brought in. Again, we'll hit on that a little bit later. Drop percentage, 4.3%. That was 13th best, so guys held on to the ball. Guys like Calvin Ridley, who they just lost to free agency, he goes to the Titans. Calvin Ridley really had a great year last year. 1,016 yards, led the team, 25th in the NFL in yardage, and you really got exactly what you paid for with Ridley. You were paying him as the 23rd highest player, or highest paid wide receiver in the league, and he ends up giving you the 25th output in yardage. So really got what you paid for. He eclipses the 1,000-yard mark. You released Zay Jones before his final year of his contract. Zay Jones goes over to Arizona. This is a guy that I really was wrong about his career trajectory after he left Buffalo. And I'll explain why here in a bit, but he was scheduled to make $8 million average annual per year in his contract with the Jags. He only played 9 games last year, 321 yards, only 36 yards per game, dealt with a knee injury, and he's going to account for $6.6 million in the dead cap this coming season. But as I said, I am willing to admit now I'm wrong about who Zay Jones was and how long he played. I really didn't think he played much longer in the NFL after he left the Bills. I just felt like his traits were really just average. Definitely an athletic guy, but I didn't think his route versatility and traits as a wide receiver really translated well to being a guy that could stay in the league for as long as he has, and he's about to enter his 9th season. And by the way, his first year at Jacksonville, 2022, had 823 yards. During his time in Jacksonville, had a modest 45 yards a game. So, Zay Jones goes to Arizona, though. The Jags then signed Gabe Davis from Buffalo. So let's talk about Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis has had 4 seasons in the NFL. He's played 64 games. That's an average of 16 games per season, so he's only missing a game a season. That's really great availability. He's recorded 2,730 yards across his 4-season career in the NFL. That's 42.7 yards per game. So he's edging out, well, I can't say that. He edged out, Zay Jones's time in Jacksonville. But this is kind of where Jags fans will really be excited about. 16.7 yards per reception. Gabe Davis has and really feels like he always will be a guy who is a deep threat. And we'll talk about why that is a little bit later. 27 touchdowns across those 4 seasons. That's about a touchdown every other game. So really love to see that. Last season, Gabe Davis with 746 yards was the 49th most productive receiver in the NFL. So a modest wide receiver too. 7 touchdowns, 43.9 yards per game, so that's slightly better than his average career number. He's ahead of guys like Michael Wilson at Arizona, but behind a guy like Darius Slayton at the New York Football Giants. And again, this statistic I think is really what Jacksonville fans are going to be super excited about. That's that average yards per reception number, 16.6. That was 6th most in the NFL. Pretty impressive. And that's because he is so threatening on post routes, go routes, dig routes. Gabe Davis is someone who I would describe as a handful. Once he reaches that stem in his route tree where he's making a move, whether it's left, right, or straight, I think he's just a handful. He uses his hands and arms to create separation. He's got a high center of gravity, but despite that, he's pretty fast. Brandon Beane famously said that he was hoping Gabe Davis would run a slower 40-yard dash, and he kind of did, and that's how he fell to the Bills. But his play speed is so much quicker than what you see at the NFL Combine. I think what really makes Gabe Davis great, he doesn't take plays off. He has this motor about him throughout the entire 4 quarters of a game where if you're playing against him on defense, you don't really know, is this going to be a play where the Bills are running it or is he going deep? And he's a really well-disciplined player, and I think Jacksonville fans are going to love that about him. But the Jaguars organization pays him 3-year, $39 million contract. That's an average annual value of $13 million. That's tied for the 28th most expensive wide receiver in the NFL. So this tells me Jacksonville's expecting him to rack in 800 and 900 yards, right? These contracts aren't about what you did in the past. It's what a team believes you'll do for them in the future. So can Gabe Davis reach that level? Well, this season is the first season in his career he won't have a big-time wide receiver one in front of him. He's going to have guys like Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk in front of him. We'll talk about them later. But I think we're really going to find out, was he getting open himself or was he getting opened? We'll see. Got a few numbers for you, courtesy of Matt Harmon at Reception Perception. He had a success rate, against man of 53.8%, against zone 76.3%, and against press 51%. All three of those figures are in the bottom third percentile of the NFL. Not great. Most frequent routes were curls, goes, and digs. His best routes were outs and goes. His worst routes, slants and comebacks, believe it or not. Thought he'd be a great comeback guy, but I think he's more of an in-breaking guy than an out-breaking guy. And then just a quick note on his relative athletic score, because I was just curious. I think something that helps him is his size, his quickness. He had a great broad jump at the NFL Combine. He's a definitely explosive guy who can jump pretty high. 7.07 relative athletic score. Ridley, a guy who I think is universally thought of as an athletic wide receiver, only a 5.55 RAS. Zay Jones, 9.74. And Keon Coleman, again, these are just some random guys. They're all related, right? Because we've got two Jags guys. But I have Keon Coleman's number here with an 8.18 relative athletic score. So, Gabe Davis kind of factors in between all those guys as an athletic, semi-athletic wide receiver relative to the rest of the NFL. The Jags go out and draft Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round with the 23rd overall pick. He was the fourth wide receiver taken behind the first trio. And at LSU, man, his numbers were crazy. 1,177 yards, 17 touchdowns, a 40-yard dash of 4.34 seconds. My analysis of him was, and still is, he's got big playability. He's fast. I called him a green grass guy. If he's got green grass in front of him, say goodbye. He's really excellent running go routes and just finding space with his speed. He's great for a team that's needing an outside receiver for sideline lobs. I didn't see much high pointing in his tape, and that is going up and grabbing a ball at the highest point that you possibly can to avoid a deflection or an interception and minimizing that interference, if I can use that word, from a defender. He relies more on his speed and bucket drop passes, but we'll see if he can show something different with the Jags this season. He's got a limited route tree. He had success with his goes, corners, outs, and flats. Not great at posts, digs, or comebacks. So I personally hoped that he was going to fall to the Bills. I thought this would have been a great fit for what the Bills were needing. He does not. The Jags get him. So now you've got two guys we just mentioned who are deep threat players. Moving on, we're looking at wide receiver Christian Kirk, 787 yards last year, 65.6 yards per game. Pretty good. Only 3 touchdowns. He's the only starting receiver returning from last season. I should say wide receiver. And Christian Kirk is a consistent producer. Really loved him coming out of Texas A&M. His career average yardage per game is 56. He's had a 1,000-yard season before in 2022. He only played 12 games last year with a torn ab muscle affecting that. And, like I said, I think he's a consistent producer, but in my opinion, based on what the Jags paid him, I think he's still being overpaid. Last season, he was paid $16 million in total cash. That's the 9th highest paid wide receiver. This season, $16 million again. That's on schedule to be the 25th highest paid wide receiver. And he's the highest paid player on the team this next season. Trevor Lawrence's contract doesn't really kick in until 2025. So I don't think that he's really playing up to what they paid him. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. So that's your wide receiver room. Now let's get into the tight end room. And we're here to talk about Evan Engram, excuse me. I think this is a guy that's not being talked about enough. Last year, had a great season. Prior to Jacksonville, he had an up and down career with the Giants. But last year, 963 yards. That was 30th among all players, third among tight ends. Receptions-wise, he had 114. That was fourth among all players and first among tight ends. Think about that. Evan Engram was fourth among all tight ends and wide receivers with 114 receptions. And this is another number that stands out too. His yards after catch, 516, 16th among all players, second among tight ends. Wow. 4 touchdowns, tied for 12th among tight ends. Now the bad news is, for this room, the Jags don't really have anyone behind him that's threatening receiving wise. I can't speak to how dominant they are as run blockers, but I know when Evan Engram's on the field in passing situations, he's definitely a threat. And last year's super evidence of that. Just a reliable guy. So shifting now to the running back room, Travis Etienne Jr. The good news: 1,008 yards last year. That was 11th most. 11 rushing touchdowns. That was 9th most. No one had more broken tackles than him in the NFL. He had 31 broken tackles. His rushing attempts per broken tackle was 8.6. So for every 8.6 rushing attempts, he had 1 broken tackle. That was 5th most frequent. The bad news: average yards per game last year, despite that high number, was 59.3, which is 19th in the NFL. Not that great. Average yards per carry was 3.8, 55th in the NFL. Latavius Murray had a better average than Travis Etienne Jr. His average rushing yards after contact was only 1.6, so not great. But you had some other numbers that are in there that are good. Whenever I think of Travis Etienne, I think he's got wheels. He's just so fast to the outside. He's a great tool in space with swings, angle routes, screens, tosses, crossers. But he's not too scary to me in obvious run situations. A great value player for his rookie deal, only a $4 million cap hit this year. And the Jags picked up his 5th-year option this past April, so he will be on the team this season and the next. So I think he's a good quality running back for what you're paying him. Behind him, not too great. Tank Bigsby had some fumble problems. He was a 3rd-round pick last season out of Auburn, played in all 17 games. He had 50 carries and averaged only 2.6 yards per carry. 132 yards total. He had 0 highlight plays from what I could see. And then beyond him, you've got Dearness Johnson, who's only had 1 season with more than 200 yards. And then they just drafted Keelan Robinson out of Texas in the 5th round this year. He's really just probably going to be a kick returner. So no one really beyond that starter, much like the tight end room for the Jags. Offensive line-wise, the Jags gave up a pressure percentage of 18.1%. That was 9th best in the NFL. And again, like we talked about at the top of this episode, not the best running offense. Okay? So let's start with offensive tackle Cam Robinson. Had a knee injury last year. He's the 2nd most expensive player on the team next season with a cap hit of $21.9 million. Kind of a controversial player among Jags media from what I could tell. He was dead last among tackles in run block win rate over the past 2 seasons, according to ESPN analysts. Definitely a better pass blocker. The Jags signed last year's midseason trade acquisition offensive guard Ezra Cleveland to a 3-year deal, traded a 6th-round pick for him, so definitely a great value trade there. They sent Tyler Shatley to the bench, who had an 82% pass block win rate, which was 63rd out of 65 qualifiers. Yikes. So Cleveland will definitely start at left guard again this coming season. And they signed center Mitch Morse from Buffalo to a 2-year, $10.5 million deal. Morse, Bills fans know him. He's entering his 32-year-old season. such a stalwart for the Bills for so many years. Not the biggest guy, but athletic. They used him as a puller many times, whether it was on those trap runs or those play action bootlegs that were super successful for the Bills. 14th in pass block win rate, according to ESPN, with a win rate of 93%. Didn't allow a sack last season. So the Jags send Luke Fortner to the bench, who had a pass block win rate of 87.9%. That was 31st in the NFL. So definitely an upgrade in both the center position and left guard position. Right guard wise, Brandon Sherff, who's entering his 33-year-old season, is going to start, most likely. He played 92% of snaps last season. And then the Jags go out in the 4th round and draft Javon Foster out of Missouri. He was an angry run blocker, long and powerful, so see if Foster can kind of compete against him for that starting spot. Right tackle-wise, Anton Harrison was a first-round pick last season, started in every game, and allowed the lowest percentage of pressure out of all rookie linemen, according to PFF. So overall, I think the Jags' offensive line stands to improve based on the moves they made. So, maybe that leads to a better rushing output this coming season. So there's your Jaguars offense. Now let's turn the page and talk about the defense.